Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Our latest program, our continuation of our 2021 virtual author series. We're very glad that you could join us here on the Hall of Fame's unofficial channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. Our guest today for the author series is Andrea Williams. She is the author of a terrific new book, young adult book, but good for adults too. It's called Baseball's Leading Lady, Effa Manley and the Rise and Fall of the Negro Leagues. As always, programs like the Virtual Author Series brought to you through the generous support of the Ford Motor Company. And we do thank Ford Motor Company for their support. We don't charge for these programs, and a large reason why we don't charge is because of the generosity of the Ford Motor Company. We're very glad to have with us Andrea Williams, author of this new book, Baseball's Leading Lady. She is an author living down in Nashville, previously worked for the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City, got to know Bob Kendrick and Buck O'Neill, among other folks. Andrea, welcome to our program here at the Hall of Fame. Thanks for being with us. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, and I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I always like to begin, Andrea, with kind of a basic question. I'm a writer myself. I've written a few books, although I haven't written one in a while. And the motivation to write a book, if you've never written a book, it can be kind of daunting to go through the process. You have to come up with an idea. You have to be diligent. You have to write every day. It can take many, many years. And based on what I've read about you, this book, this project was something in the works for about 15 years. What was your motivation for writing this book, Baseball's Leading Lady? Did it come from your time at the Negro Leagues Museum, or did it come from somewhere else?
Yeah, I think both. It came from certainly working at the museum and really understanding not just the significance of Effa's career, but really the significance of the Negro Leagues, what it meant, in sports history, what it meant in American history, what it meant for the Black community on the whole. But personally, I grew up loving baseball and watching baseball, but always really being intrigued by the business side of the sport. Like I say that I would be at the games and I'd be like, that signage on the outfield wall, like what is the actual return on investment for that? Like how do stadium finance deals really work? Like you hear about, the big I remember watching Sports Center over and over when Alex Rodriguez left. The Mariners were my favorite team. So I was heartbroken that he left, but when he got that massive deal that at the time was the richest deal in history with the Rangers, and he left and got $252 million over 10 years. And I remember feeling like, wow, that's a lot of money, but also like what goes into making that kind of deal? Like, how does all of that work? And then of course he goes to the Yankees, and what are the logistics of like, now someone else is paying for the contract, that like all of that was always what was interesting to me. So I grew up wanting to like be on that side of the ball and studied sport management at Georgia Southern. And remember, like at the time, like Kim Ng, who is now, the first female general manager, she was an assistant with the Yankees. And I remember just kind of, always looking around, searching for, these kind of virtual mentors, like who are the women in the space? Because this is what I thought I wanted to do. And so going to the museum and learning about Effa, being, having that initial experience with her story and her career was illuminating for me, because I didn't know that there was someone who had already done the things that I wanted to do, and that she did it, as a Black woman in the 30s and 40s made it that much more special. So yeah, this is like part, everybody needs to know this history because it is important history, but it is absolutely, I want young girls, young kids in general, young Black kids to know that it is possible to shoot for the front office, to shoot for this kind of career, because here's someone who did it, in the most marginalized of positions, when women weren't, Black women especially weren't even coming close to doing things like this. So yeah.
So it was your first day at the museum where you heard about Effa Manley and you said, this is somebody I need to write about, learn about more?
Well, I knew I needed to learn about her. I was definitely way far away from getting to the point of deciding that I wanted to write about her. That's where like the 15 years comes in. It was definitely not all active writing time. I am a pretty fast drafter. Like I know there are people who spend years writing a book and my brain just doesn't work like that. Like if I spend that long in a project, I am going to give up on it. But it took that long for me to get, the courage, the wherewithal, probably the skills necessary to really understand how to attack this. It also allowed me to have, it gave me the time and space to like start a family and have kids, which without that, I don't think I would have written this story or understood the importance of writing it for young adults, as you mentioned at the top of this, this need for kids to have access to our true history as it exists and not just, will repackage books that are written for adults when they sell really well and then put out a young reader's version. Like I wanted to write this book for kids first, so that again, as they enter this world and they are the ones that are taking the positions in the front offices, in the boardrooms, in the Capitol buildings, that they understand where we come from so that they can then help impact our today and our tomorrow. So yeah, it took a while, but I was always really fascinated. Started my research, then when I was at the museum, reading as much about her as I could, asking questions about her. Don Newcomb came and visited the museum for a golf tournament. And I'm like, so tell me what it was like to play for Effa. I was doing that then, even though I didn't know that I would ultimately write a book about her. Like I said, I wasn't in that headspace yet. But when it came time and I decided to actually do the thing, I did have that little bit of a head start, which certainly helped move the process along. I tell people that as a journalist, as a writer, particularly of nonfiction, a lot of times when you're doing research, that initial research is just trying to find the story, the thread of the story, the narrative arc. How do I want to put this thing together? What is the structure? Who are the main characters? I came to it already knowing that. So my research was really just fleshing it out. It was going deeper. It was connecting some of the dots that remained. But yeah, I did certainly have a head start from my time at the museum and really felt like I knew Effa at that point.
You mentioned Don Newcomb. Did he still have vivid memories of Effa?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely remembered that she was, kind of spunky and said what was on her mind and, definitely, kept a tight ship for sure. But I was looking for like specific conversations and like a lot of detail. He didn't have that, but he definitely remembered the thesis of her character, if you will, which was that she was a tough woman who was about her business and about excellence 100%.
We want to mention the book is available through Roaring Book Press, which is a division of Macmillan. And you can purchase copies of the book at either of these websites, us.macmillan.com, or of course at amazon.com. Either one of those two would be fine. And it is a book that is certainly well worth picking up. I want to talk about her ownership and her style, and also the breakdown of responsibilities between herself and her husband, Abe. Andrea, my understanding, my impression, we do a women in baseball program. We do a program about civil rights, and Effa Manley's featured in both of those educational programs here. So we do talk about her. The impression that I've always gotten from the research I've done is that it really was Effa the one who ran the day-to-day operations of the team. She was the baseball fan, the baseball diehard. She ran the team. Abe was kind of in the background. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so Effa was definitely doing the day-to-day in the sense of that she was a diehard and Abe was in the background. Abe wasn't necessarily in the background. He was just out on the field. So he was the one that would travel with the team. He would do the scouting trips. He would travel back to Virginia a lot where he was from and, go see, semi-pro or sandlot games and try to see, if there was any talent there on the field that they needed to bring up. But when it came to the actual business, that day-to-day running of the team, Effa 100% did that. I think Abe and Effa really, really, really had a great partnership in terms of having these roles that presented presented themselves pretty quickly. Effa talked about how that very first season when they purchased the team and Abe is away for spring training and he's just kind of calling her and it starts out, oh, can you take care of this one thing? And then he, calls back a couple of days later, I need you to take care of this too. And she has like no idea what is happening here. Like, I'm saying that I grew up watching baseball and knowing that I wanted to be on the business side of it. Effa was not that at all. Even as she loved baseball, even as she, walked from her Harlem apartment to go see the Yankees play at the Polo Grounds, this idea that she was preparing herself mentally to work in the business of baseball did not happen. She was thrust into this. And again, it was primarily because Abe just really handed it to her. He just threw it into her lap. Abe he was a baseball fan as well, but he had always had an affinity for Black baseball. His favorite team was the Hilldale Daisies, and he'd actually purchased a Black baseball team in 1929 that ultimately could not survive the Great Depression. So this team, when they go back into baseball together now, because they are married in 1935, first in Brooklyn, and they moved the team to Newark. I imagine it that Abe is pretty quickly like, I have tried this on the business side and it ain't working for me. So Effa, see what you can do. Yeah. And he, again, because he really enjoyed the actual on the field, the action, hanging with the guys on the bus and spending time with the team, he did that part of it. So, it's not, I explain it, to kids, it's not. Now there are, every team has so many employees, there are different departments and all these kinds of things. Back then, particularly in Black baseball, the teams were run on a shoestring budget. There just wasn't a lot of staff like we see today. So, I liken it to, Effa would have been the general manager and Abe would have been the director of scouting, is ultimately what it comes down to. So
interesting.
And she would have been the general manager who also handled like PR and community relations and all these things. Yeah.
My understanding is that she did all the contracts.
Yes.
She arranged the schedule, made the hotel reservations, handled all that sort of stuff. She had I guess a keen eye for business, whether it came naturally or not. And she was one that really wanted to make sure the players were taken care of. I have always heard that she paid for an air-conditioned bus, which was almost unheard of at the time. And she generally would put the players in the best hotels available to Black Americans at that time.
Yeah, I think she understood, again, because so Effa, before she gets into baseball, is this activist really in the Black community. She's in Harlem. She actually leads a boycott against a local department store because even though this store generated the majority of its profits from the Black community, they wouldn't hire Black sales clerks. They wouldn't put Black people in the most high profile and best paying jobs. She had a problem with that. Even though she was of privilege herself, even within the Black community, because she was so fair-skinned and she could have passed if she wanted to, she still understood that, the Black community functioned on the whole. And for her, it was about lifting up from the bottom and making sure everybody had a fair chance. So when she gets into baseball, she is still that person and still approaches her career with that in mind. So yeah, she can't change the fact that this is the era of Jim Crow and that her team can't, eat at the restaurants they want to eat at or stay at the hotels that they want to stay in. But if they're going to have to potentially eat on the bus, that bus is going to become the restaurant. Or if there is no Black hotel in the town that they're in, they're going to be driving through the night to the next town for the next game. Then now that bus becomes the hotel. Well, let's create the best environment on the bus for them. So she was absolutely about taking care of the Black community, which in the context of her owning this team meant taking care of her team for sure.
I wanted to talk more about that boycott. It was a major department store in Harlem. And she basically organized this boycott and said, we're not going to support this store until they start hiring Black clerks. And it worked. It had the impact.
Yeah, it worked. It is it is seeing how it played out. It's like all things, really everything's a process. So, initially she partnered with, a local Black pastor. And initially he went in front of his church, in front of his congregation, and was like, bring all your sales receipts. This is how they know how much money really the Black community is driving into the store. So it starts by, let's gather the proof. And then we'll take the proof in, and surely that will be enough, right? Because now we have in black and white the evidence that you need that shows how important this community is to your store. Surely you will do right by us. That didn't work, right? Like, so now it's like, let's take it to the next stage. And now we are picketing in front of the store, okay? We're still not really making any progress. Then it's don't buy where you can't work. This is where we get to the actual boycott, where we are no longer allowing we're going to encourage Black people to not spend their money at the store until they hire sales clerks. Well, that is enough to get the owner's attention. And so he decides to have a meeting, and Effa is present in this meeting, which is already significant, right? We're still talking about the 1930s. We're talking about a woman, talking about a Black woman. The fact that she's even allowed in this room as these men are conversing is a big deal. But the owner is still hesitant, right? He's like, okay, I'm losing a lot of money here, but I still don't know if I'm ready to pull the trigger and hire these people the way you're asking me to. And Effa, not content to be seen and not heard, speaks up in the meeting and is like, look, if you don't hire these girls, we care about our Black girls just like you care about your young white girls. If you don't hire them, what are they supposed to do? Become prostitutes? And the room falls silent. And that is what is actually, that is the final straw, if you will, that gets this guy to commit to making these hires in this store. So yeah, I always tell people that, Effa was successful because she was willing to do the things that no one else would do and say the things that no one else will say. Now, if we look back, and talk about, how people felt about her in the moment, right? Like, I'm sure, the men in the room probably felt some kind of way that this woman would dare say something, so brash. But now with the beauty of hindsight, we can see that sometimes that's what it takes, right? Sometimes in order to win, you have to be willing to break the rules. And Effa was 100% that.
Yeah. Boy, to have been in that room, that's a scene that would be perfect to be dramatically played out in a baseball movie.
Yes.
I mean, that would be one of the highlights right there, to see the tempers and the emotion that surely must have emerged that day.
Yeah.
Let's talk, Andrea, about some of the other league owners and what their general feelings were. Did they like Effa? Did they resent her? Were the feelings mixed? Was there a general consensus, or was it all over the board?
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a general consensus with anything, particularly when you're talking about, ownership and these men that are, type A entrepreneurs owning businesses. Like, you're going to generally get like thoughts and sentiment that are all over the board. I do think that they understood that they needed her 100%. They are, again, this is baseball pre, multi-billion-dollar industry baseball. So even Major League Baseball is still finding its footing at this time. But in Black baseball in particular, it's still, the Effa comes into this new Negro National League. So Rube Foster's 1920 league had folded around the time of the Great Depression. This newest iteration was founded in late 1932. They played their first season in 1933. Abe and Effa come in 35. They are in Newark by 36. This is a really, really new operation happening right here. And again, there's just not a lot of money in Black baseball. This is again across the board. We don't have merch sales like we do now. We don't have TV deals like we do now. Really, you're making money from ticket sales. And for Black teams, those ticket sales are chopped up because they have to rent stadiums from white teams, from white stadium owners. A lot of times they are also paying a percentage to booking agents. So they are operating really tightly here. And again, as I mentioned, with the number of staff members that each team held, you're seeing that same kind of thing when it comes to league operations. The men plus Effa, that are involved in actually running the Negro National League, they are also running their teams. They are trying to do all the things. There's not a neutral commissioner, even though there were people, including Effa, who felt like they needed that would help tighten up operations within the Negro Leagues. They didn't really have that. Everybody was really doing 50 things at one time. So they needed Effa. They needed someone who could come in and, oh, we got to send somebody to Chicago for the East-West All-Star game to make sure that the money's coming in, that it's accounted for correctly, that everybody gets their fair cut of it. We need somebody when we fast forward to 1945, 46, this era of integration when Branch Rickey is starting to sign players and not really treating, the Negro Leagues owners fairly, not compensating them for their players' contracts. We need somebody who can appeal to a Happy Chandler on our behalf. Effa's the one who writes that initial letter for them. So even though there were certainly moments where they're like, yo, why is this woman here? And why is this woman loud and trying to tell us what to do? Because again, she's the same person that she was in Harlem when she says, no, we don't want our girls to become prostitutes. She's that same woman with that same personality. So she's not just there, right? It's not just her presence. It is how forward she is, not just in her thinking, but in her speech. She is saying things to them to hold them accountable. She is willing to tell Posey, who owns the Homestead Grays, look, you got to report game stats. You got to do it on time. You got to do it right. And by the way, I looked at this the last time. This is all wrong. Y'all done had as many hits. Y'all done had as many runs. Like, what are you trying to do here? Like, this is not it. So certainly that, that rubbed these guys the wrong way, right? Like there are these moments where certainly the tension elevates and you get comments like, Abe, this is your wife. Get her back home. Get her in front of the kitchen stove. I'm not coming back until you do that. Those moments certainly happen. But I think on the whole, they understood that they were better with her than without her. Just again, because of the logistical perspective, they needed all hands on deck in order to make this league run.
You mentioned Cumberland Posey, and I was reading in the book about the conflict between Posey and Effa Manley. Doesn't seem like they really liked each other.
Yeah, I think they were colleagues. I think that outside of baseball, maybe they wouldn't have had coffee. But their relationship, like most of these, it ebbed and flowed. I think it was respect that generally held them together. They would have these blow up moments, and then months later or by the next season, like, they were okay. I mean, this is just, the beauty of working on this book is seeing, having access to Effa's files and also the Black press, where we really get the details of these highest moments of tension, particularly for Posey, because he's got access to the Pittsburgh Courier because his dad is a part owner of the paper. So he gets pissed, he can write about it, right? So we see all of that, but we also have time to see how it kind of mellows itself out. How, again, when it comes down to it, they have to come together and work together for the good of Black baseball.
Andrea, were there any other league owners that you could call allies to Effa Manley?
Yeah, I think in terms of wanting her team to be successful and wanting the league to be successful, I think they all were allies. I think they all understood, again, if we look at Rube Foster, we are the ship and all else the sea, this idea that if we do not come together as a group, then we will not succeed as owners of Black baseball teams, that Black baseball on the whole will not be able to move forward. I think they all understood that. And so I think they were allies in that regard. I think that, again, because they didn't have a neutral commissioner, they are all talking amongst each other all the time about how to move the league forward. So if you could imagine that now, if we're talking about what are the issues in Major League Baseball, and instead of the commissioner ultimately making decisions or this board coming together, we've got people who are owning individual teams who are then trying to make decisions on the good of the whole. And there's a lot of conflict that comes up there all the time. So did they disagree a lot of times about how to actually operate within that? Well, of course, if we've got players that jump ship to the Dominican Republic or, to Puerto Rico, and, on the whole, we're saying, well, we need to show these guys that they can't do this. The guy who actually owns that team and lost his players might be willing to reinstate them faster than some of the other owners who don't want their players to leave, right? They want to set a hard example. And also, yeah, I'm not really mad if Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson don't come back to your team, because then maybe we can beat you, right? So there was a lot of that going on because, again, they're running teams and the league at the same time.
Yeah. You know, I should know more about the history of the city of Newark, where the Eagles were based. I know they've had a great minor league baseball tradition. They had the Newark Bears, who for years were the Yankees' top affiliate in the minor leagues. But wasn't Newark back in the 30s and 40s, wasn't that really a major northeastern city? I mean, they had probably one of the bigger markets in all the Negro Leagues. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Newark was attractive to Abe and Effa out of the gate because they understood that New York proper was just too tight of a market. You know, you've got the Dodgers and the Giants and the Yankees, but then also you've got several Black clubs that, even if New York isn't really their home base, because again, you know, it is very rare that Black team owners actually own their own stadium. There are a lot of Black teams that kind of call the New York area home. So they had a really difficult time eking out an existence that first year when they started the club in Brooklyn. But Newark was really attractive because it was so close, right? Like, it was close enough that they could get a lot of that New York traffic. If they had started to build a New York fan base, they could come right over and still support them in Newark. And, you know, and the same with a lot of the Black community that was, you know, gathering in New York, gathering in Harlem. As people started to spill out, they spilled out into New Jersey in the same way that we see now. People, you know, well, you know, cost of living might be a bit too high in New York, I'll move to Jersey. So there was a lot of that happening then, which meant that they had more space to really build a fan base, but there was also a big enough Black community there that they knew they could tap in immediately to that, even as they also tried to cultivate some white fans too.
Effa put on some very interesting promotions at the ballpark, Rupert Stadium in Newark. And I'm not talking about giveaway nights. I'm talking about civil rights nights, and I'm talking about anti-lynching nights. We probably have some youngsters in our audience who maybe don't know about lynching, what that was, and why this would come up as a topic, as a theme night at a ballpark. Talk a little bit about these civil rights nights and these anti-lynching efforts that Effa staged.
Yeah, again, it really just goes back to who Effa was at her core. You know, the woman who hosts the Don't Buy Where You Can't Work campaign in Harlem, who leads this boycott, is the same woman who shows up and now is an owner of this baseball team. She is still about civil rights. She is still about moving her people forward. She just now has a larger platform to do it. And so she immediately, you know, with this team that has, you know, the access to the larger Black community in Newark, that has the ear of the press, because people, you know, the Black press, if you will, certainly not the white press, not to a large degree anyway, but the Black press is coming and covering the game. And if she holds an anti-lynching protest, well, that makes the paper too, right? If she decides that she wants to raise money for the local chapter of the NAACP and the press writes about that, that makes the paper too. You know, there is certainly, I think, you know, she's running a business and she's smart about it, in the same way that now every team has a community relations department. Doing good is good for business. And I think she understood that. I think she understood that if I am coming new into this community with this team, a good way to get Black people, the Black community, to care about this team is to show that we care about them. So she was really, really active in doing that. But at the end of the day, she just wanted to create a better environment for Black people. You know, they had a youth program that allowed Black kids in the community to come to games for free and meet the players. Like, she was wholly interested in using this platform of this baseball team to better her community. This is why ultimately, as we start talking about integration, why she held on tight, why she tried to position, you know, not just her team, but the leagues on the whole as perhaps some kind of minor league affiliate, because how can we keep these teams intact? It's not just about having an opportunity for Black players to play on the field. It's also, we've got Black managers and executives that can work in the Negro Leagues that won't be able to work in Major League Baseball. It is, just because we have Jackie playing for the Dodgers, do young Black kids in Brooklyn feel the same affinity for this team or feel that they have access to the team the way Black kids in Newark did with the Newark Eagles? So she was forward thinking in that way that now is commonplace with professional sports teams on the whole, really. But she was just really ahead of her time in a lot of ways. And again, it was A, because of the needs of the Black community, but B, it was just in her. It was just in her.
We know there were lynchings taking place in the South, certainly. Were there lynchings taking place in the Northeast in the 30s and 40s? Was that going on near Newark?
I do not know what it was like near Newark in terms of being right where she was in that community, if that was why she did that. I just think, it was an issue that everyone in the Black community was talking about, in the same way that, when George Floyd is killed in Minneapolis, or, the Black community in Flint doesn't have access to clean water, people in New York or in California or here in Nashville, where I am, still care about it, because ultimately we are still connected, even if we are geographically separated.
Oh, it certainly was a national issue, no question. And Effa's awareness spread definitely into that area. Very interesting about Effa Manley is her attitude toward Major League general managers like Branch Rickey. She did not like it when Major League teams took away Negro League players without proper compensation or any compensation. And she had it out with Rickey, and I'm sure some of the other GMs as well. To me, that's a fascinating aspect of her career.
Yeah, I think, that is probably, in terms of feedback that I get, that is probably the thing I hear most often is, wow, I had no idea that Branch Rickey operated like this, that this is what was really happening behind the scenes of integration, as this thing, that we've been taught was so great. I never saw this side of it. But, again, number one, she's running a business, right? And so players, if you're running a baseball team, they are assets to the business. You have invested money and you're hoping to get a return. And if anybody understands that, Branch Rickey understands that, right? Branch Rickey is the guy in St. Louis who creates the modern farm system as we know it, because that team is in financial straits and they're trying to figure out how to build a powerhouse club without spending a whole lot of money, right? They just cannot afford to go out on the free market and buy players. So Branch Rickey is like, look, if we get guys when they're really young and underdeveloped, we can pay little or nothing for them. This is why guys are still getting paid little or nothing in the minors. We can then develop them in-house and call them up when they're ready, or we can sell them and make this fabulous return on our initial investment. He knows how the business works, right? And so does Effa. Effa's like, look, I signed Don Newcomb when he was a 17-year-old kid, and we as a team are pumping this money into him. I am paying Biz Mackey, who is this fabulous veteran catcher who is now serving as player manager, just so that he can bring Don Newcomb up to speed, just so that he can develop him into a top caliber pitcher. We are doing the work here. In the same way that, the Kansas City Monarchs are putting the work into Jackie Robinson, who at UCLA, baseball is his worst sport. He is developed into the guy who later becomes this icon in the majors, partly because of what happens those 9 months that he spends in the Negro Leagues. So Effa, from a pure business perspective, has a reason to get upset about Branch Rickey coming in and literally stealing players. But also, she understood that if this thing keeps happening like this, these teams and these leagues are going to collapse. And then what? Because Branch Rickey is only signing a player here and there, right? That doesn't mean that everybody gets to go, which is ultimately how it happened. It takes until 1959 for every team to get at least one Black player. And then for a long time, we've got this quota system. So the vast majority of players at the time who were in the Negro Leagues do not have an opportunity. Branch Rickey is not interested in signing the okay guy, the guy who's at the middle or the bottom of the pitching rotation. He doesn't want that guy. Well, now, because of how integration happened, now that guy doesn't have a job anymore, not in professional baseball, because he can't make the jump to the majors, and now the Negro Leagues no longer exist. Effa understood that. Effa understood that, again, Biz Mackey, who was a player manager, but was in his 40s when he was working with Don Newcombe, probably doesn't have a shot in the majors. Major League Baseball did not come calling for Black managers and Black executives. They just wanted players, and they only wanted a few of them. So Effa really is thinking globally in terms of the larger impact. I like to say this is where women come into play, right? Like women, we have a great ability to think way down the road in a way that sometimes men don't. And she understood what was going to happen, not just what does it mean in this moment that now we have a Black man who gets to play on a white team. Yes, we're excited about that. That's fine. That's great. But what is the impact of this thing going to be in 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
So when Rickey took Jackie Robinson from the Monarchs, he gave up nothing in terms of money. The same with Newcombe. When Newcombe was taken from Newark, nothing in return?
Zero. Roy Campanella was signed away from the Baltimore Elite Giants. Tom Wilson's team, Tom was the president of the Negro National League. Nothing.
Now, when Bill Veeck and the Indians swooped in and took Larry Doby from
Yes.
Newark and from the Manleys, was there compensation there?
Yes. Bill Veeck had a conversation. He called Effa on the phone and said, I want to do business with you. I want to sign Larry Doby. Let's talk about it. And Effa immediately said, well, what are you going to give me for him? And he offered $10,000 initially, which Effa knew was way underselling for sure. But she also knew she never got a call from Branch Rickey for Don Newcombe. Right. So this is the situation we're in. You know, I've heard people that are like, well, did Effa potentially create this precedent where Black players are undervalued? But by this point, by summer of 47, like we've already seen 5 or 6 guys get signed. They got nothing. Those owners were paid nothing at all. So 10,000, yes, is highly undervaluing Larry Doby, but it's something. And at the end, he says, well, also, if he stays on the team, if he can last at least 30 days, we'll kick in another 5,000. So ultimately they were compensated 15,000 for him. But yeah, that kind of that instance. And then also after Abe and Effa decide to get out of baseball, after they really see that there's no turning back, the wheels of integration are chugging along, and really Black baseball has come, particularly on the East Coast where Jackie is playing. We're coming to the end of the road here. They decide to sell their team to some businessmen out of Memphis. She was able to negotiate with the New York Giants and get Monty Irvin a deal. And that really kind of, solidified this precedent that you're going to have to pay for Black players. Like, again, are these owners getting paid for these guys' actual worth? Not even close, but at least at this point, again, with Monty Irvin's deal in 1948, at least they're getting something. With Branch Rickey, they got nothing. They got nothing.
Very interesting. We're talking with Andrea Williams, author of a terrific new book, Baseball's Leading Lady, Effa Manley and the Rise and the Fall of the Negro Leagues. We're going to take some of your questions in our Zoom group chat. We have Lewis, who posted fairly early, so I want to get to Lewis's question. He writes, there have been stories with some evidence that Effa was not African-American. Andrea, would you comment on that?
Yeah. This is the other thing. So it's Branch Rickey didn't pay for the players. I didn't know that. And then it's also what is the deal with Effa's, race or ethnicity. And generally speaking, we understand that her father was white. Her mother was a seamstress. She had a relationship, some kind of intimate relationship with this man who she was working for, and Effa is the result of that. There are people who 100% say that Effa is white, probably because of this father, but we also have census records. Number one, we have census records and marriage certificates that say that Effa was Black. Effa was married several times. On all of them, she put that she was Black. Census records state her as being Black. But even if we're kind of, up in the air on that, well, would she have lied on her marriage certificate because it would have been illegal for her to be married to her Black husband? I don't know, because then she also, in this interview that she did a few years before her death, she also publicly said that she was white. I'm not sure about all of that. How do we rectify all of that? Well, we do also know that census records state that her mother was Black, and I don't really see any arguments against that, right? So if we agree that her father was white and that her mother was Black or had some Black, Effa's very, very light skinned. So it could be that, her mother was a mulatto, that she had some white heritage as well. If it's in her mother, it ends up in Effa too. And the thing that I like to say is that I think it's really interesting when we have this conversation about Effa. Number one, Effa comes up during this time where passing is at its peak in this country. And, Nella Larson's book, Nella Larson herself had this really, interesting history with race and kind of lived on either side of the color line. And she writes this book called Passing that is now, has now been adapted into this movie that, I heard did really well at Sundance or whatever festival that it was at. But that book takes place in this era where Effa is coming of age in the 1920s. This is when it is really at its peak, when Black people who are as fair as Effa is have a decision to make. And they can either decide to get away from all of the hardship that comes with being Black in America, particularly during this era of segregation and Jim Crow, or they cannot. And I think what we're talking about really, when we keep having these conversations, when we keep saying, well, she's white until proven Black, and even when we have the proof via census records and marriage certificates and also census records for her mother, I think what we're really saying is we just have a hard time believing that someone like Effa, who could have escaped her Blackness, did not. Because we know that so many people did. It is hard to fathom that a woman who could have escaped all this not only didn't, but doubled down on it, spent her career fighting for this community, she is a woman. She's not just a Black man who could have passed and didn't. She's a Black woman. It's hard enough to be a woman. And she decides to live as a Black woman, to fight I think that is hard, particularly for those of us who know history and understand the legacy of passing. It is just hard to fathom that. But we have enough that says, yeah, she is a Black woman or has some Blackness in her. Her players, Monty Irvin, later says, yeah, when you see Effa later, that's a Black woman. Even if there were questions early on, when you see this woman later in life, she is a Black woman. So yeah, she had a family member who went on record, when she was inducted and said, yes, she definitely wasn't white. We need to really honor who she was, because it means something, not just that she's the first woman inducted into Cooperstown, but also that she's the first Black woman. So when I get these questions, and of course, I didn't get to have a conversation with Effa, but I really like to kind of flip it around and say, why are we so committed to even asking the question when we have data, when we have, documentation that suggests that she is Black, that says that she is Black?
Just for those who might not be familiar with the terminology, when we talk about somebody passing as a member of a certain race or ethnicity, they might come from one background or background, multiple backgrounds, but they pass themselves off as being from another background. As you can tell, it can be complicated.
And I do want to add too that Effa was raised with half siblings who were Black, right? Her mother was had married two different Black men and had children by them. So her half siblings were obviously, race is a social construct. Ultimately, all we're talking about here is what is visible to the eye. Her siblings were completely, obviously Black. When you pass, you have to leave. You can't be a Black person passing for white and then still be in relationship with these Black siblings, because people can put two and two together, and that blows up your whole spot, right? And so I think that plays a role in this too, that she'd grown up around these Black siblings, around, firmly rooted in this Black community. She's going to Black restaurants and shopping at Black owned stores. She lives in Harlem. When she graduates from high school, she is a model in all Black fashion shows. Like, she is in this community. She'd have to leave that completely. This is, I mentioned Nella Larson, who wrote the book Passing. Nella's situation was different. Nella, she was born to a white mother and this father who was of mixed, ethnicity, but he kind of left the family. So it was her and her white mother. Her mother remarries a white guy and has siblings. So she has siblings that are fully white. So she's kind of the odd man out in her family. Effa was that as well, but on the other side of it, in the sense that the other people around her was Black, she would have had to have abandoned them. And I don't think she was willing to do that. Again, if we use the context of the rest of her life, this woman who leads this boycott of this department store and is, so loud and active in fighting for Black civil rights, would she have felt comfortable not ever being able to communicate with her siblings again? I don't think so.
Final question from me, Andrea. Here we see the plaque for Effa Manley. I think you started at the Negro Leagues Museum, if I'm not mistaken, 2004. Yes. And then 2 years later, you hear about the election of Effa to the Hall of Fame. When you first heard about that, what did you think?
I was thrilled. I can, to this day, I remember where I was sitting. I was at my desk. I remember getting the news and just, amazed. Again, I am coming to this, as a woman, as a Black woman who's always interested in sports and wanting to work in the front office, wanting to run a team, and had always, Effa was already a Hall of Famer in my heart, for sure, because she'd already done this. And so to see this larger recognition, this national recognition, it meant everything. It was, it was bittersweet because, we also, Buck O'Neil didn't make it in. Gus Greenlee, who is probably my after Effa, my favorite, Negro Leagues character, if you will. He didn't make it in, but it was a really, really big moment because I knew, again, my background, I knew what this would mean for other girls, for other Black girls who would come and want to have these dreams, that they could see that, she didn't just do it, but now she's in Cooperstown. That just proves that she did it on the highest level. So yeah, I was absolutely thrilled. I think it also too, now that I've written this book and I'm talking about her all the time, and there's a lot of people who haven't heard of her, and that quickly legitimizes the work that she did. It also legitimizes the fact that she did it in Black baseball, because for many people that was just kind of this thing that operated on the margins, and was it really on the same level? Now Major League Baseball has elevated the status of the Negro Leagues, but for a lot of people, immediately coming out of the gate and saying, yeah, she's the first and only woman inducted into Cooperstown, it validates her. I don't need the validation, but for people who do, it provides that immediate validation.
I'm holding a copy of the book here. We actually got this from the Cooperstown Library. That's how we first became aware of it. It's a hardcover, 328 pages. It is a young adult book, but it's pretty long, although the pages are, I love how you space out the lines. I have a lot of trouble with my eyes, and this is very easy to read. It's a nice format, but there's a lot of information. This is really an in-depth book for young adults, for adults as well. I think it's really appropriate for both. The book can be acquired, us.macmillan.com or at amazon.com. Andrea, we had some folks on Facebook asking if there's a way to get a signed copy. Do you have a website, or is there another avenue that maybe people could get a signed copy from you?
Yes, if you order from Parnassus Books, which is my local indie, and I believe the website is parnassusbooks.net, they do have signed stock. And I have promised that if we sell out, and I will definitely go back in, and I hope that we do sell out of the stock that they already have, that I will sign more. So yes, Parnassus, and I'm looking it up to make sure I get the website right now. Yes, Parnassus, that's PARNASSUS books.net.
Okay, very good. So parnassusbooks.net, and I will spell that one more time, PARNASSUS SUS Books, that's all runs together, no spaces, parnassusbooks.net, and that's where you can get a signed copy of the book. And we'll put up a reminder for that website at our Facebook page as well, so that people can have that as a reference point. Again, it's Roaring Book Press, and that's a division of Macmillan. Very glad to have with us over this past hour, Andrea Williams, author of Baseball's Leading Lady, Effa Manley, and the Rise of the Fall of the Negro Leagues. Andrea, it's been a real pleasure. I've learned, I knew a little bit about Effa because we do teach her here at the Hall of Fame, but I've learned so much more just by being with you, and we do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I mean, I had some dreams and some goals for this kind of promotional tour for this book, and did not think that I'd be talking to you folks at the Hall of Fame. So it has been an honor for sure. And yeah, I'm glad that you learned, and I hope that people read it and learn as well.
Well, I hope you'll be doing some other interviews. Have you been on MLB Network yet?
I have not.
All right. I'm going to mention your name to Brian Kenny. I know him over there. We'll
Okay.
see if we can get you on the MLB Network.
Okay, I
I'll see
appreciate
if I
that.
can pull a string or two.
All right.
But we do really appreciate your time. Best of luck with the book. And we hope that it continues to do well. It certainly has received the very positive reviews that I've seen over at Amazon.com, among other locations. Our thanks to Andrea. Also, our thanks to the Ford Motor Company for their sponsorship of today's program, our continuing virtual author series from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Folks, we hope you've enjoyed the program. Enjoy opening day. Have a great day, everybody.